Hi, I'm Metta Spencer. Today, let's go to, I think it's Corvallis, Oregon. And that's where Oregon State University is, because there's somebody there I want to talk to. His name is Aaron Wolf, and he's a professor of geography. Not just maybe the average professor of geography, because he does a lot of peace work as well. And as part of his role, he's interested in rivers and water and the conflicts over rights to water and the boundaries between states and how rivers run through and across boundaries and create challenges for people to allocate the water. And so he's got a whole background as a peace builder. So I want to say hello, Aaron Wolf.
Hi. So nice to be here.
Well, it's wonderful. I want to talk to you about your role as a mediator, or I don't know what you call yourself, a conflict resolver, when you deal with countries or individuals. I suppose there could be individuals fighting over water. Tell me about that, and then we'll go on to some specific cases of situations in the world today that where water conflicts are particularly salient.
Sure. So, as your listeners will know, water crosses borders, ignores our political boundaries. And so if we're going to manage it, we have to manage it cooperatively if we're going to do it well. The problem is some of those borders are quite tense. So Arabs and Israelis share river systems, Azeris and Armenians share river systems, Indians and Pakistanis. A lot of the major rivers in Asia originate in China. And so this creates a potential source of tension. But because water is so important, it also drives people to talk about it across borders, even when they won't talk about other things or sometimes anything else. Water will bring people in a room. And so that gives us an opportunity to use shared water resources as a vehicle for dialogue, and gives us a kind of language around thinking about a shared future. And that's true internationally, and it's also true here in the United States, that it brings in ranchers and environmentalists and city people. So it really induces people across political spectrums into a room and gives them a language to talk to each other.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm sorry, I there was a little glitch there, a mistake I had made, and it came back to bite me. So I may have to edit that. Anyway, okay, thank you. So you are there some particular cases where you have got people in a room together to talk about water who would not normally have wanted to spend much time together? And have you actually engaged in formal negotiations?
I have often as part of a team, and often it's being hosted by somebody with a vested interest in seeing dialogue. So I've worked with the World Bank or with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation and other agencies like that. So anywhere from Central Asia, I've worked a bit. Worked on the Nile Basin, Southern Africa, Middle East. Southeast Asia, Mekong, and then here in the Western U.S. quite a bit. We worked with Reclamation for 5 years, helping to facilitate dialogue between stakeholders around Western U.S. basins.
Mm-hmm. Well, how much of it can, how much of these conflicts in general, if you can give an overall statement, can be resolved if just people talk rationally, and how much is it the case that the world is actually getting seriously short of water, and no matter what we're going to do, somebody's going to get an insufficient amount of water, and there's no getting around it.
Yeah, I think the number of solutions increases as people cooperate. So I think if countries develop unilaterally, if a country wants to build a dam, upstream, it'll come at the expense of the country downstream if there's no collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as the two countries cooperate, the dam upstream might well be managed in a way that both brings benefits upstream, but also increases the growing season downstream or helps with drought mitigation downstream. So I think the lesson is that if we want to get past the impending limitations on water everywhere, only made worse by climate change. The only way out of this is to collaborate, and I think I would add a bit. You ask about looking at it rationally. That's only one part of the equation. We've tended to look at kind of four aspects of water: the physical water that you feel, that you touch, that you move; the mental water that you calculate, the crop per drop. And these are the rational sides, and these are the ones in the West we're really comfortable talking about. But oftentimes the conflict itself is not about that at all. It's about the emotional water tied to power, water tied to oppression, water tied to control. Or it's about spiritual water tied to spiritual transformation. And so one of the lessons I think we're learning is to bring all four aspects into the room, kind of reuniting the rationality with the emotive and spiritual components to be able to have a more holistic conversation around all of the aspects of our being and our relationship to water.
Well, I'm prepared to believe you, but I have to admit, it's never occurred to me before. What emotional, can you give me an example of a situation in which and I guess it's a group of people who have some emotional investment in a particular body of water or something that that dimension of things has escaped me until now.
Sure. So if Israel and Palestine are discussing, obviously not recently, but they have over the years had quite good conversations around water. And when Israel comes to the table, they're thinking in terms of problem solving. They're really thinking about in the mental, the calculations, the efficiencies. But for the Palestinians, water's been one of the tools of the occupation, and it has been one of the tools been used for control. And so it's not just about calculation, but there are a lot of very important, not just symbolic, but addressing history and rights becomes as important as problem solving. And so that's what I think we need to do. You know, if you and I think we do think about these things more than we know. At one point, an engineer asked me about this. He said, "What is this spiritual water?" It feels like a red herring in a conversation. So, well, if I asked him what his faith tradition was, he says he's Catholic. I said, if you had a clogged toilet in the church, would you ever use the holy water to help clear it out? And he said, no, absolutely not. Right? So we get it, right? And so if you're talking to the Hopi Nation about, using water from their sacred spring to move coal slurry, you see that there's a disconnect. So I think we're thinking about all of our relationships, both to each other and to water, in the same conversation.
Okay, that's interesting. Now, there's a phrase. I think this woman in Congress got in trouble for it just yesterday. There's a motto or slogan or something called "From the River to the Sea," and I gather it's a meaningful. I haven't even talked with anybody who's used the phrase, but it seems to be a meaningful slogan for Palestinians, maybe wanting to reclaim land that had already been taken over by Israel. Is that a case of something being holy and sacred to Palestinians? This River Jordan, I assume it's talking about the River Jordan being from the river to the sea. Is that?
Yeah. No, Representative Tlaib use that phrase, and it is a popular phrase, I think, in the Palestinian movement. And from her perspective, the way she explains it, she's just talking about freedom for Palestinians, justice for Palestinians from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean. Israelis see it as threatening. Is if you have Palestine from the river to the sea, where is Israel? Are you advocating for the erasure of the Jewish state? But to your point, the holiness of the Jordan River is exactly one of the tools that was used. People who've been to the baptism site where John the Baptist baptized Jesus, it's a trickle, and it's a trickle of water that doesn't have quite the quality is not very good, and that's over the last decades. Israel and Jordan have both diverted water from upstream, leaving behind this warm, brown, soupy, not very picturesque, not very holy stream. And so that was one of the things that was able to draw people. The fact that it is holy to three religions was one of the selling points to both Israel, Jordan, and Palestine, to start to look at how do you supplement the flow in the lower Jordan? How do you clean up the quality of the lower Jordan? And I think that's true in lots of places. The Ganges River, for example, they used to say, well, the Ganges is too holy to be polluted. No matter what you threw at it, it would its natural holiness would clean it up. And now they're saying it's so holy we shouldn't be polluting it. And so flipping that and reminding us of our higher obligation in our relationship to water is something that's very motivating.
Well, what could be done? You mentioned how could you clean up the Jordan River, the lower? How could you? Are there technologies that could be put to use if the countries agreed on them, or is it really doable?
I think so. It's the Jordan is a very, very overstretched system, but generally, when we look at water scarcity, what's scarce isn't water. What's scarce is the resources to generate more efficiency. So if you have the resources, you can move from flood irrigation to drip irrigation. You can desalinate brackish water or even seawater. You can move to more efficient crops, or you can import crops. I think in most systems, I mean, you think about the space station runs a closed system, so there's no natural water there, and they just stay on a closed system and use the water that they have over and over and over. So I think there are technologies to address some of these crises and to treat water. It's a question of political will. Do we want to put these resources to something that oftentimes is a very low priority for or low contribution to a country's GDP?
Mm-hmm. Well, if you don't mind, let's go to the Tigris and Euphrates, or at least the around, is it Basra, where the marshes used to be. It was a whole civilization living there on reed houses and marshes and so on. And I believe Saddam Hussein drained those. And then when he lost the war, the people coming in tried to reflood the marshes, and it looked okay for a while. But now I've seen photos. There was something in the New York Times a month ago about the area, and people are moving away. It looks awful. It looks completely dried up, and that they are just discussing this as if it's an ordinary example of what climate change is going to do to everybody. Yeah. Or is it really just about climate, or is it partly political? Is somebody doing something to make this happen?
It's probably a bit of a mixture of both. Climate change is absolutely affecting the hydrologic cycle everywhere. We see it here in the Colorado Basin, certainly the Tigris Euphrates. And somebody's doing something. So upstream, Turkey's been building a series of dams, the Greater Anatolia Project, and so I think people are using more water, and climate change is giving us less water to use. But that's a really good example, because that's the kind of place that, if there were basin-wide collaboration, if there were a functioning government in Syria and in and Turkey and Iraq were able to talk to each other and think about incentives, where maybe greater efficiencies in Turkey would result in more downstream flows for Syria and Iraq. That's the kind of agreement that can only be reached through dialogue across borders. And again, I think the solutions are there. The question is the political will.
Mm-hmm. Who's working on it? Is anybody trying to make that happen? Or
they are. I think the Turks and the Syria. Turkey and Iraq have been in on again, off again discussions around collaborating. So I think people in international rivers know what the problems are, and again, it's just a question of couching the solutions in a way that that everybody in the basin benefits, and it's not just all of the cost doesn't fall to one party.
mm-hmm. So in terms of the future of solving the water shortage that is inevitably going to be caused by climate change, what is the most promising, or maybe we can't choose between things, but have to do a whole package of interventions that, if you're in charge, if you're Mr. World Water Control and you've got the decisions to spend your money doing things to try to help us survive this impending water shortage, tell me what your priorities would be. How would you go about solving this worldwide?
Oh, gosh. Well, I think one side of it we haven't talked a lot about is the governance side, is these international basins, or these shared basins within countries, require a body to address changes in the system, as they happen. And that requires a river basin organization or a treaty, some kind of regular dialogue between the parties that also addresses the needs of the stakeholders in the basin. And I think that would be the first step, because you can't, anything technologic, there's a lot of great technologies out there, but you can't implement anything if the people aren't on board. And I also think that having the people on board help facilitate conversations over other issues as well. So starting with water, you can move bigger into what we call environmental peace building. So I think that's one thing. I would spend a lot of time focusing on dialogue, on river basin organizations, on stakeholder bodies. And then collectively within a basin, every basin is unique, but there is some subset of increasing supply or decreasing demand that can be done. Greater efficiencies, sometimes simply paying for new toilets for a city is enough to generate a lot of water for farms.
Oh, really? Stop, because I want to think about that. Tell me more, because this is completely a novel notion.
Well, I think it was Denver, somewhere in that area. They were looking to build a dam to pump a lot of water, because generally the engineering approach is, when you start to run out of supply, the approach is to generate more supply. Well, the opposite is also true. You can generate less demand, right? Manage the demand. And so somebody actually did the calculation that if you just bought everybody in Denver a new toilet and a new shower nozzle, you would save much more water than the dam could generate at a fraction of the cost.
Okay, now that's really interesting, because I have a hand shower, but I don't think it's saving me much water. I just don't stay in the shower very long.
There you go.
That's the solution, I think. Have everybody take
Shorter showers.
But
That's right.
now my toilet, my goodness, I haven't thought about. Don't all toilets use about the same amount of water?
Now they do. These are efficiencies that have been introduced over time.
Oh, I
but
know
at the
what
time,
happened. Yeah, I have had to buy a power flush toilet because mine
there you go.
was not so good anymore because they had this new rule: less water, and it's not as good. I don't believe in it. So go back to
There you
your
are.
You're not an engineer, though, or you're a think man.
That's right. So, well, one of the politicians that was involved in those discussions, he pointed out, he said he doesn't get any benefit from greeting a trainload of toilets that he does in cutting the ribbon on a dam. So, we're always thinking about how whatever solution we come up with needs to be politically viable and even politically desirable. And that's the other part of it.
Well, I'm now the toilet interests me because I believe I saw a few years ago that Bill Gates had a big contest. He was offering a prize for anybody who came up with the best new toilet design. But this wasn't, I didn't think it was to save water. I thought it was to make it possible for people in third world countries where they don't have really toilets to speak of to have, good sanitation. But it would be, I think it would be something that would decrease the water use. How's that project going? Has anybody won that prize?
Oh, no. It was just the kind of conversation you remember for all the factors that go into discussions around water.
Oh, so nothing's going to come of it. They're not going to come up with a better toilet.
I haven't heard from Bill Gates, but I haven't heard anything on this.
Okay. I derailed you. I got very interested in this shower business. Okay. So you could save enough water to increase the amount of irrigation that's possible.
Oh, absolutely. Sure. A lot of the world's irrigation is flood irrigation, where you just let water flow onto a field and infiltrate. But if you move to sprinklers or you move to drip irrigation, you're using much less water. If you move into greenhouses, you have less evaporation. So all this technology is out there. But as you pointed out, in the developing world, they don't have the resources to invest in these kinds of things. For drip irrigation, you need pressurized pipes. And so in a lot of places, these aren't options. And that's probably where Bill Gates is trying to help for technology that's appropriate for different geographies.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, so now tell me about you're working to some extent in your own area around the Colorado River is being depleted. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Tell me about it.
Well, so same as we were discussing on the Tigris and Euphrates, climate change is making sure that there's less supply. We have overdrafted the system. Water from the Colorado goes as far as Los Angeles. The water rarely makes it all the way to the Delta in Mexico. We have treaty obligations to deliver water to Mexico that we haven't been meeting. I don't know if you've seen recent pictures of Hoover Dam and behind it, but it's just dropping. It looks like a bathtub rings just keeps getting lower and lower, and so we're generating less electricity. This is people are saying this is the shape of rivers to come. We will just have simply much less water to deal with, and all of the stresses that come with that. Stresses between agricultural interests and environmental interests and urban interests, stresses between countries, stresses between states. All of these things are projected to be exacerbated, and so having the better conversations earlier is really a critical thing to start thinking about now.
And there's no technological solution to, let's say, the Colorado River.
There is. If you wanted to spend $1 gazillion, you could desalinate water from the Pacific. You could, you could bring water from far away. But these kinds of things generally don't make sense, as much sense as greater efficiencies.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What else can we do for efficiencies? I've heard of the drip agriculture, and also the downside, I think, of this desalination is I've heard that it creates, then you have all of this salt water that you've got to do something with. What's the answer to that?
Yeah, so the places that are using a lot of the Gulf Coast, sorry, not the Gulf Coast, the Persian Gulf countries. Israel's using a lot of desal. They basically, what they're trying to do instead of dumping all the salt in one space is they're using these diffusers that are really far off coast. And so, if you're dumping a lot of salt in a body of water that's salty in and of itself, if you do it, you have to really do it in a gentle, diffuse way so that it doesn't come out as a pulse of salt water. But even so, they find kind of little dead zones right around the where the salt water's going in. But that doesn't feel like a problem that can't be resolved. I think the larger issue with it is it's a very energy intensive process. And so if we're trying to decrease our use of fossil fuels, this is one of the sources. Desal generally is using oil or coal to desalinate. And so if we're going to do it, we're going to need to move more and more to solar desalination. So we're not just exacerbating one problem to resolve another.
Well, is that a reasonable expectation?
In some areas, it really can be. If you think about a lot of places that don't have water, they have a lot of sunshine. So there's a really interesting idea on the table where Jordan would set up solar plants generating electricity, and Israel, who's on the coast, would be able to desalinate, and that water would then go back to Israel, Palestine, and Jordan. So that's the kind of thing that could be possible. The same in Southern California. There are places where solar desal may make sense. And of course, in the Persian Gulf, there's plenty of sunshine there. That's not an issue.
Mm-hmm. But the expense of making enormous arrays of solar capturing equipment would be, wouldn't
Correct. It? Correct.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So now, tell me about the melting glaciers.
Well, they're melting. One of the tricks with water management is you try and store water when it comes, whether it comes as snow or rain. You try and store it for when you need it for irrigation or for to generate hydropower. And in a lot of the world, that storage has happened for free through glaciers and through snowpack. And in a lot of the world, that's exactly what climate change is impacting. The glaciers are melting and retreating. In the Pacific Northwest, we're getting more rain and less snow every year. So the precipitation hasn't changed, but the form that it's coming in is changing. And so once that happens, now you're stuck in a lot of ways. You don't have any way to store the water unless you think about building dams. And we haven't in this country. We haven't for 30 years really thought seriously about building dams.
Well, there's a lot of opposition to it, isn't there?
Sure. Yeah.
And what is the general objection? I would have to admit that my friends have been talking about how for many years they were down on dams, but I never asked them why.
Sure.
I know what the argument is.
Well, they have a lot of environmental impacts. I think certainly they impact the timing of rivers and a lot of fish and wildlife. have a relationship with the variability of a river. It's really hard for fish to swim around them. So that, for example, when we built the big dams, Grand Coulee Dam and Chief Joseph Dam on the Columbia River, we effectively stopped all salmon migration to Canada. They don't have salmon since those dams were built. We trap sediment behind the dams, which means there's more erosion downstream. We displace an awful lot of people and change the relationship to the river. We change the temperature of the river. If it's just sitting as a lake, it warms up, sometimes to the detriment of the wildlife. So there are a lot of environmental impacts that over the years we've learned to think more seriously about. And so I think we went through a lot of dam building from the 40s to the 60s, and really not so much since then.
But that is a source of power, and it's in a way sustainable, isn't it? I mean, it doesn't have the dangers of nuclear.
Yeah, it's all trade-offs. I think. I think this is exactly the issue that we're going to have to deal with in the next decades. Is which set of trade-offs are we most comfortable with?
I remember in the past when a big dam building project was being contemplated, hearing a lot of discussion about how bad it was going to be. I remember when I think the Aswan High Dam in the Nile had some very deleterious effects on even health of people downstream. And I remember there's the Three Gorges Dam they were building 15 years ago in China, and everybody was saying what a tragedy it was going to be. What have, in the longer term, have the bad predictions been borne out, or would you say that the trade-offs have been a reasonable compromise?
Well, I could speak to the Columbia here. These dams started to be built in World War II, and they were built to win the war effort. And they did that. And they brought people out of poverty, and they brought electricity to people that didn't have electricity. And we still have some of the cheapest and cleanest electricity anywhere in the country. Having said that, we pretty much decimated the salmon run. What was a mighty flowing river is now a series of lakes. The relationships between the tribes and the rivers, some of these were, there's a site, Celilo Falls, just a little bit east of Portland, that really was effectively New York City for tribal culture in the Pacific Northwest. There was a set of falls where the salmon could be caught easily, and we basically just wiped that out. And so disrupting in a profound way the relationship between the tribes and the river. So I don't know. I mean, all I know is there's trade-offs, and I think dams do have really deleterious effects. And if there's something better, it would be great. And if there's not, it's I think you're right. It's not the worst source of energy in the world, but I don't think it's the best either.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And not many countries then are looking to build more dams. Is that right?
Well, in the developing world, they are. I think when I say that, the era of dam building has stopped, that's here. We built all our dams and used up all of our good dam sites in North America and in Europe. And I don't think they're looking to build more dams. But in the developing world, and as they point out, they say, sure, when we get the same standard of living that you have, we'll be glad to start thinking about the negative impacts. But the advantage that they have is that they've seen the impacts, and in some places they've seen how to help mitigate the negative impacts. And so they're now building dams on the Mekong River, and they're trying to be, I think, a lot more careful than we were around fish passage, relationship of villagers to the river, and to just in general to ecosystem health as they're building them.
Mm-hmm. I was talking to a woman a couple of days ago about water and economic systems. She was wanting to argue that the biggest threat to the world, to adequacy of water, was, well, I don't think she was arguing it, but she was saying that her friends, her colleagues said that it's all capitalism, that somehow if we weren't capitalist societies, we would take care of our resources better. And all I could think of at the time was, I used to go a lot to the Soviet Union and some of the other socialist countries before the end of the communist era. And I remember seeing the Aral Sea drying up. Now, that was definitely caused by, I think, a diversion of water of a river, wasn't it, that fed the Aral Sea, and they wanted to raise cotton or something, but I believe it was not for profitability particularly, but more, they were going to make gunpowder or something. Do you know the story about how the Aral Sea went downhill so badly?
I know a bit, and you hit the hot spots. Actually, it goes back to the U.S. Civil War. That when we were fighting the Civil War, price of cotton, global cotton, skyrocketed. Just about the time the Tsar is looking around in Central Asia, saying, "I wonder what we should do with all this land." And so he goes, "Cotton," and that became the monocrop there ever since. And so you're right, the Sir Darya and the Amu Darya are the two rivers that feed the Aral Sea, were both diverted for cotton and other crops and other reasons. And so over the years, the sea just dropped and dropped and dropped, and now it's just a puddle. And it's dangerous because it leaves behind all these really toxic salts that are caught in the wind. And so that's one of the things post-Soviet Union. The five Central Asian countries are working together, not just to bring more water to the Aral. I think they've pretty much decided that it can't be brought back to historic levels, but to use water more efficiently, to think more about the trade-offs, to be able to connect better and manage better across the borders.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you're saying that some of these countries are working together more cooperatively. I think that is one of the things you've written about a lot, is the opportunity to use water as a constructive peace building, a way of getting countries to cooperate more than they would have instead of going to war. Is it your position that countries with rivers have less or more conflicts than other countries between themselves?
That's interesting. I think both. I think the word rival comes from people who live along a river together. It comes from the same root as river. So I think when people live along river, they have a natural relationship that can be competitive. And I think if we look at history, and this is something that we've actually looked at historically over a 60-year period, how much conflict versus cooperation there have been over rivers. And what we see is kind of a timeline where countries develop unilaterally until they impact each other. One country builds something, a dam or a diversion, that impacts the other country. And then that's where you have these tensions. And that's where there's been a lot of prognoses around the wars of the 21st century will be about water, and water will be the new oil and things like that. And you get the headlines. That's where India and Pakistan start to threaten each other. That's where Ethiopia and Egypt exchange threats in the press. And that's where a lot of those headlines around conflict, around water wars comes from, is these initial stages where people are posturing. But then what happens, and usually the press gives up being interested about it, is there then 10 or 20 years of dialogue and negotiations until they sign an agreement. And so if we actually look over that 60-year period, 2/3 of the time we interact over water, it's cooperative. And even when there's tensions, it's verbal tensions. It's politicians blustering. It's headline writers writing headlines. But there's very, very little violence across boundaries, specifically over water. And there's only been one war in history, and that was 4,500 years ago, that was fought specifically over water.
Oh, which one was that? That's interesting. 4,500
It was
years.
the city-states of Lagash and Umma on the Tigris River, which then led to the first water treaty in history. So I think our record is pretty good, that we can resolve these issues. We can have dialogue over these issues. We can be creative. But the threat is also there. Unless we're perpetually creative and engaged and thoughtful, there really is a danger that that overcoming our challenges will be foreclosed.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that you'd worked in Africa. I was trying to think of Southern Africa. I was trying to think of what rivers or water issues you might have run into there. I can't think of any. Where
the Nile's kind of a big African river.
Where? The Nile.
The Nile.
Yeah, but sure. I thought you said the southern part.
Mm-hmm.
The Nile.
Yeah, what they call the.
Go on.
Well, the southern, the SADC region, there's shared rivers between all the countries down there. South Africa, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Botswana, that whole kind of southern tip. All of those countries share at least one and sometimes two river systems. They have a very sophisticated network of river basin organizations, citizen science to keep track of what's happening in the rivers, and really quite cutting edge water management.
I hadn't heard about any of them. Where did you particularly work with? What groups?
In all of them. I worked with the development corporation, SADC, Southern Africa Development something. And hopefully I'll be heading down there again in December. Really? There's a new agreement, it's a really interesting part of the world for water dialogue.
Well, tell me about it. You're going there right away. So this is a current activity of yours. Okay. I need a map because I can't even visualize where these rivers are that you're referring to. I don't think I've ever heard of them. So obviously I'm not very well informed about Southern Africa. What's the story? What's going on there that you're going to be involved with?
Well, just helping to support. There's a new organization on the Pabusa, the Pongwe. I'm going to have to look it up now. I'm just blanking on them. But there are three rivers that flow together between Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Southern Africa. And they're just now coming to a brand new agreement, and so just helping. We're collaborating on a workshop on transboundary water management and kind of conflict mitigation, because I think most people who are managing water, they're trained in the technical side, but not in the conflict management side. And I think if you're managing water, you're going to end up managing conflict. So we're just helping to bring some of those experiences to
Well,
the
does
to the
it
region.
go with land claims too?
Correct. Yeah.
Mhm. Hmm. Okay. So, what are you specifically going to go there? Where is the location of these negotiations, and who are the people proposing what? I'd like to know more details.
I'm afraid I'm not going to share those details. I like you,
Oh,
but they're in the middle of active
oh, I see. So
negotiations. Yeah.
there are things that you're not supposed to talk about. Oh, okay. That makes it even more interesting. I'll have to try to find out whatever it is that I should am not sufficiently aware of. Well, then why don't you tell me about some of the negotiations you've already done, which have
Sure.
succeeded? Then I presume after the fact, it's not secret.
Yeah. um, there have been a couple of really good dialogues that I think the way these things happen, as I said, to get to a treaty, it takes 10 or 20 years. And so the things that I've been fortunate to be part of have been kind of small, discrete components. So I was able to work on transboundary water quality in the Mekong Basin. I was able to work on helping to develop a system of monitoring water quality in the Caucasus between Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia.
Really?
I've been involved in little kind of side dialogues around the Jordan Basin. So those are the kinds of places that I've worked. And as I say, it's very discrete conversations around very, very particular points.
And
And then here we're having, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, one of the exciting things that I'm working on right now, it's here in Oregon. Is I mean, this is the beauty of the field. Is there's a lake that's really important for the Pacific Flyway here, and the lake went dry one year, and a lot of birds were endangered, and so the environmentalists went to the legislature and said, you got to come down on the ranchers, you have to stop the irrigation, you have to bring more water into the lake. And then the ranchers organized, and instead of gearing up for battle, they just called up and said, can you help set up dialogues with the environmentalists, because we think we can come up with better solutions collaboratively than we can in court. And so I think that's the kind of thing that happens literally all over the world, is people are recognizing there are much better solutions than that we come to collaboratively.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What rivers, was there a river there, or what?
Yeah, it's called the Chihuacan River, and it's Lake Abert, where the part of the Pacific Flyway.
Mm-hmm. You have students who are interested in this topic, and is that part of what you teach?
Oh, absolutely. No, we have a workshop in water conflict management and transformation, and we bring students literally from around the world. There's, like, as I said, most people who are trained in water are trained only on the technical side, and then they find out that people are always angry with each other and they're not quite sure what to do about it. So, and my students are terrific. They're all working. One's working on shared wetlands. One's working in the Tigris Euphrates and the Jordan Basin. One's working in Zimbabwe. And then a couple are working on this Chihuacan here in Oregon, and it's really lovely, because they're coming to school to learn how to problem solve, to learn how to facilitate dialogue, to learn how to bring people together. And so when that's their motivation, they're lovely to work with, and very motivated to do right.
Do you do the setting up? Do you reach out to groups that you think could benefit from having a discussion, or how do you come into the problem?
Yeah.
Do they call you? Does a company call you? Do people who are the stakeholders who are not getting enough drinking water call you, what happens?
Yeah. Usually there's somebody who's supporting the negotiations. So the World Bank does this a lot because oftentimes a conflict is around some piece of infrastructure. And the World Bank is in the business of loaning for infrastructure. And so if they realize that the conversation is going to be especially difficult, they might call me. I've worked for different UN agencies. And then here in the West, as I said, the Bureau of Reclamation, I worked for Department of Interior. They're lawyers who negotiate water agreements with tribes throughout the U.S. West. They wanted to bolster some of the skills in dialogue and in facilitation. So it's usually a third party that's engaged. Oftentimes, when people are engaged in face-to-face directly, they don't need an outsider. They can usually get pretty far on their own.
Mm-hmm. What about wetlands? Have you been involved in trying to save wetlands, or do you even believe in saving them?
I do personally, but it's my PhD student Zoe Rosenblum who she's taken it upon herself to map all of the shared wetlands in the world and figure out what kind of either treaty or other governance protection they have currently, and then figuring out how that can be supported, how the protections can be bolstered. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like wetlands, and she loves wetlands. So.
Tell me. I've had such confusion about it because my understanding is that wetlands produce a lot of methane, and swamps and bogs and things, and yet I understand that they can be or always are a net sink for carbon. What's the truth of the matter? Most people seem to feel that at least we want to keep wetlands from being dried up, because once they dried up, they're very vulnerable to burning and other ways of having the sequestered carbon be released back into the atmosphere. But whether there's a desirability of reclaiming wetlands, that is, lands that have already been drained and built on and so on, is it a desirable thing to try to put water back into them and soak them again? What are the arguments for and against wetlands?
Well, I don't know a lot of arguments against, except as you say, the methane. But my sense is, and I'm not a wetland expert by any means, but my sense is the argument for their natural productivity, as a host for fish and wildlife. And it filters water. I think the Israelis, one of the first things back when we called them swamps and all we thought about was malaria and gators and stuff, we wanted to drain them all. And so Israel did. They had a huge wetland, in the Hula Valley, and they drained it all, turned it into ag land back in the 50s. And it was horrible. The land sank, and it was so much organic matter that it attracted a lot of mice and rats and other things. So then they had to put pesticides and herbicides, and all of this is just upstream of one of the big reservoirs of the Sea of Galilee, which is one of their big drinking water storage sites. And so they've gone back and are really trying to reclaim them with some natural variability and species regeneration. So I from what I hear, these projects are really important and useful. I haven't heard a lot of argument against reclaiming wetlands, but you sound more informed than I am. I'm willing to learn.
I haven't heard anybody speak against it. It's only in my own head. Because when I read that wetlands are a source of methane, I think, how can that be also then a net sink? I don't get it. So I'm just sure that it's because I don't know enough. Yeah. But even, for example, rice paddies, I think that there are real problems caused by growing rice in water, because it does produce methane, and methane, of course, is a very, very bad greenhouse gas, many, many times worse than carbon dioxide. So it's only my own confusion that.
Sorry, I can't clarify it.
Okay, fine. Well, so you have a large group of students coming from other countries to learn how to do what you do, right? And are there other places that do this? I'm not aware of any such program elsewhere.
There are a couple of places, and it's a growing field. The term of art now is water diplomacy, and there are programs in IHE Delft, Institute for Water Education in the Netherlands. There's a terrific program in Stockholm International Water Institute. So here and there, I think people are recognizing that managing water requires managing conflict and starting to put these pieces together. And what's nice is the community is very friendly and collegial, and so we're able to share information and share resources and share students. Yeah, it's a growing field and in exciting ways.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing what you do in Southern Africa when I get a map and figure out where you're going. Tell me how you got into it. What was your course of biographical development that led you into this work?
Oh, well, so I grew up back and forth between California and Middle East, and in both places, water is part of politics and just as a matter of course. So I always kind of knew there was a relationship, but I thought the way to approach it to help was to be a technical, to work on the technical side of water. So I studied hydrogeology, groundwater. And I worked for the U.S. Geological Survey, and it just wasn't, again, it's the bias towards problem solving and towards the rational. There'd be a room full of angry people, and I'd come in, I'd say, you don't have to be angry anymore. I figured out the solution. Here's what you have to do, and it would only make them angrier. And so recognizing that this idea of how do people think together, how do they listen to each other, how do they exchange information and ideas, what do you do when competing worldviews are at the table, that these were really important as well. So I went back to school in kind of conflict resolution and negotiations. And it's that combination that's been really exciting since. So I get to teach about it as a professor. I get to research about it as a professor, and then I get to do some of it when the opportunities come up. And it's a good place to be.
Well, that's great, and it's a good thing to talk about, because even though I've been a peace studies professor and I've been doing peace work for many, many years, I don't think I've ever had a conversation about water management as peace work. So there you go. It's time for me to catch up. I've enjoyed this very much. Thank you very much.
Likewise.
And good wishes for success in whatever this thing is you're going to do in South Africa. Okay.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Okay. You take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Project Save the World produces these forums. This is episode 575. You can watch them or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, tosavetheworld.ca. People share information there about 6 global issues. To find a particular talk show, enter its title or episode number in the search bar, or the name of one of the guest speakers. Project Save the World also produces a quarterly online publication. Peace Magazine. You can subscribe for $20 Canadian per year. Just go to pressreader.com on your browser, and in the search bar, enter the word peace. You'll see buttons to click to subscribe.